starting my second year on the board after serving a year as vice president, and have assumed the role of president recently. It's great to be here with you this evening and leading into our first presentation of the new year. My first slide here is really just a quick rundown of some of the folks who are on the board of directors. Some of these people you probably know well. If we can go back one slide. Megan, there we go. So we have 7 current board members. Pat Billig was the president for the last year. She's currently serving as vice president and coordinating all of our membership activities. Ray Bridge is an at-large director who's leading the advocacy committee. Carol McCaslin is an at-large director and wearer of many hats. She's sort of our Swiss Army knife. She's done everything for a long time and is one of the key members on the board when it comes to just getting things done. Sarah Newman is a new member of the board. She joined as secretary, and she's also leading our governance committee, which will be managing our nominations process throughout the year and also helping us work on the development of new policies, new written policies that are part of best practices for nonprofit organizations. Diane Wells also is joining the board for the first time. She is leading our education committee. Curtis Williams has been the treasurer for a number of years and continues in that role. And I am the president and also serving as the volunteer coordinator. So we can move on to the next slide. So clearly we're all continuing to cope with COVID. There are some signs of life within Boulder County Audubon, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And we can just, there we go. So the good news is that we have resumed field trips. In the first couple of rolling slides you may have seen while you were in the waiting room, you saw some of those events. All of them are being publicized on our website. We're posting them on Facebook and Instagram, and also notifying folks through NatureNet if you are a member of the NatureNet web listserv. Because we are still operating under the guidelines put down by the state and by the county, our participation is limited in each field trip, generally to 6 participants. We all are wearing masks and social distancing is required. And as a result of that limited number of participants, we are asking all participants to RSVP to the field trip leaders that are included in the notification on all those different platforms I talked about. We're fine-tuning our process to give everybody an equal opportunity to join those field trips, irrespective of whether they see those on Facebook or NatureNet or some other means. We're moving forward with newly scheduled trips to open an RSVP window each Monday night at 7 p.m. So any new trips that are scheduled will have the reservation system open on Mondays at 7 p.m. And you can join a trip by looking for the field trip leader in the field trip notification and sending an email to that particular person, getting on the list. This is our 3rd monthly program now that we have presented on Zoom, and we saw some great things in April and May when it came to Zoom, and we are planning on continuing to use Zoom even after that point in the future when we're able to resume in-person meetings. There's a lot of great things about in-person meetings, but we also found that we had nearly twice as many people who were joining us via Zoom as had historically been present for a lot of our in-person meetings. It turns out, I think, that we've got people in some of the far corners of Boulder County who find it more convenient to join via Zoom than to hop in the car and drive down to downtown Boulder. So in order to continue to facilitate people's easier access to our monthly programs, we're going to continue to use Zoom for the indefinite future. A couple of key events that everybody often participates in that I want to highlight. The Christmas bird count, which happens just before Christmas normally, is still on, provisionally at least. National Audubon Society has told us that we can expect some final instructions from them by November the 15th. But right now, they've given us the latitude to schedule the Christmas bird count subject to state and local guidelines. So given that we've resumed field trips and things have gone well so far, we feel comfortable in counting on the fact that should things stay the same here in Colorado with respect to the COVID guidelines, that we'll be able to hold the Christmas bird count. Unfortunately, the after count potluck will not be held. There's just really no way for us to maintain the social distancing in that kind of an event. And National Audubon has asked us to not schedule anything like that. So we still have to work on some alternative plans. It could be that we'll have the post-count compilation discussion and meeting via a platform like Zoom, but we'll announce that well before the Christmas bird count. And then finally, one other event that we've decided not to move forward with in 2020 is the holiday party. We ended up canceling last year's holiday party, mostly because of weather. We had some really icy weather that made it very difficult for us to hold that. But as we look at the amount of planning that goes into that and the fact that it would need to be indoors, the logistics of maintaining social distancing at such a heavily attended event just becomes impractical. So we've made the hard decision to not hold the holiday party this year. We will be looking at some alternatives for some outdoor events as sort of a substitute that perhaps we can hold in the late spring or summer of 2021 when we can meet outdoors. But unfortunately, the holiday party is going to be closed. Okay. All right, I got one more slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the fact here that Boulder County Audubon Society is a 100% volunteer organization. Your participation in programs like the one we're offering tonight, participation in field trips and events, is 100% voluntary. Your generous financial support of BCAS is also 100% voluntary. And the other third key element of the tripod that supports the organization is your contribution of time and effort and energy to BCAS. That's also voluntary. It is that contribution of volunteer time is our scarcest resource. It's the one thing that I intend to really focus on is over the course of my tenure in this office is to do everything I can to make people feel welcome and comfortable in volunteering. We certainly have some very large and potentially time-consuming jobs, but we have a lot of different roles that we can really use people's help on. You don't have to be retired. You don't have to quit your job. You don't have to stop traveling or stop seeing your grandkids. We know that people have lives outside of BCAS. We don't expect people to, not go to Florida or not go visit their friends or give up their participation in other like-minded organizations. Really, all we are looking for is 2 to 3 hours a month for 6 or 7 months out of the year. We're very flexible, and we can certainly live with, your willingness to contribute even a 15 or 20 hours a year. So if you can use your chat feature, open up your chat window, and just, if you're somebody who's got 2 to 3 hours a month that you could give for a portion of the year, maybe you could just respond in the chat window, letting us know that you're somebody who can help contribute to our efforts to expand the number of volunteers that we've got in our organization who are actively contributing and building up and supporting that third key tripod of support that our organization needs to be successful. There are a lot of different ways that we can, that you can contribute that 2 or 3 hours a month. One is, you can lead a field trip. You can teach some third graders the basics of birding in a program that we're working on setting up with the education. You can help us to write grants to fund scholarships for teens who go to bird camps. you can take time to help thank our generous donors in writing for the financial contributions they make to support the programs that we do. You can contribute to the maintenance of our newest and largest Habitat Heroes Garden in the Rocky Mountain region. We are lucky to have in Boulder County, between Niwot and Longmont, a 30-acre project that's called Jack's Solar Farm that is the biggest Habitat Heroes Garden installation in the Rocky Mountain region. A young man who inherited 25 acres of land has built a solar farm, but he's lifted those panels up off the ground so that underneath the solar panels we can plant community gardens and also have extensive plantings of native plants. And some of the volunteers who've been out for the first couple of weeks have said that they were amazed at how birdy the place was, and they're looking forward to getting out there again to help maintain that place. And we're going to have an opportunity in the spring to monitor bird populations there and contribute to some citizen science projects that will be organized and under the auspices of the Audubon Rockies. So anybody else besides Megan who's got 2 to 3 hours a week that they're 2 to 3 hours a month that they can contribute? Okay, well, I'll let you guys think about that, and hopefully we'll get some other additional folks who would be willing to throw their hat in the ring. With that, I'm going to wrap it up, and I'm going to hand it off to Carol Campert, who's going to introduce our speaker for the evening. Thank you.
And I'm actually, this is Megan again. I'm going to interrupt Carol really quickly. And there was one really important announcement that Sandra Larson put in our chat window. And it's a reminder to everyone that kind of the joint listserv from Boulder County Audubon and Boulder County Nature Association is, sorry, that was not supposed to advance back that way. The NatureNet listserv is changing from, I believe it's on Yahoo Groups currently, to Google Groups, and that is different than groups.io. And so you need to register your email address if you want to continue getting that. The link is in the chat window. I'll paste it again so it's the most recent chat to everyone. There's also been emails that have gone out on NatureNet as well, but that is something that's going to be changing in the near future. And I know it's a valued resource for many of our members. So I will now turn it over to our programs chair, Carol Comfort.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
This is my first time being part of the host on Zoom. It's my great pleasure and honor to introduce our speaker for tonight, and Nat Warning. And Nat and I have not met in person, but we've corresponded, and I'm interested in his topic tonight, really interested about rock wrens, which is one of my favorite birds. And he's going to be talking about their use of rocks and that their use of stones in building their nests and blocking the entrances to the nests and building the patios they build outside their entrances is considered a form of tool use. So he'll be talking about tool use related to birds using rock wren nests as an example of nest construction as an adaptive tool, which sounds fascinating to me. And Nat lives in Greeley, in Fort Collins, and works in Greeley. He got his undergraduate degree in Wisconsin and in biology, and had a high school teacher before that that inspired him to be interested in birds. Took him on a woodcock flight display, something I've never seen, which would be fun. And then when he graduated from college, he worked at the International Crane Foundation in Wisconsin and helped with whooping crane reintroduction projects. Sounds fascinating. And then got interested in rock wrens and canyon wrens through his graduate advisor at UNC in Greeley, Lauren Benedict. He had come out here in 2008 because he was working for the city of Fort Collins in the natural areas project. And so we're glad that he's here. Some of his favorite sites, a couple are Lorry State Park, where I've never been, but I was looking at that above Horsetooth Reservoir, and then Pawnee Buttes, which we've been to quite a few times, and these must be rock wren hotspots. So with this, I'd like for you, Nat, to take over and tell us all about rock wrens and their nests and everything else.
All right, well, thanks, Carol. I really appreciate the invite. I'll just check, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure. And yeah, this is my first time giving a talk via Zoom, so you'll just have to bear with me if there's any technical issues, but hopefully you can all hear me okay. Yeah, I'm just gonna give kind of a free-form presentation. I won't take up too much of your time, but I am gonna talk about how nests are related to tool use, and I'll use my work with rock wrens as a kind of example of this adaptive behavior.
And can everyone see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Carol.
Oh, great. Okay, very good. All right, well, increasingly, we're viewing the structures that are built by animals in an architectural context. So anytime animals use materials in their environment and they use those materials to create higher order structures and complex habitations. And of course, this takes place over various scales, from the very small scale all the way up to the landscape scale. So we are not the only creatures who are modifying our surroundings, certainly. Other animals just seem to know when to stop and where to draw the line. So nests in particular exemplify this pattern that I'm talking about of animals using available materials to fashion stable and very functional structures, again, across a range of scales, from the very small nests to the very largest nests. And one thing that I actually didn't realize before diving into this research is that non-human primates are proficient nest builders, and they build nests on a near daily basis as they're moving through the forest. And this really makes sense. It allows them to stay dry, to avoid predators, and to provide safe sleeping locations. And so nest building is in our DNA as well. There's evidence that early humans used to build sleeping nests for the same reason that primates today build nests, predator avoidance, to stay dry, to stay safe. So I do want to talk more about nests and how nests might act as tools. But I think first it'd be helpful to outline some of the rules of tool use, kind of the rules of the game, so to speak. And I will say that many of the ideas that I'll bring forward that kind of challenge the existing constructs of tool use come from someone named Mike Hansel, who's a UK researcher, and he studies animal architecture, and he has a great series of books and articles on that subject, which I highly recommend. So some of the ideas and the constraints of tool use, they have been changing and evolving recently, but of course there's been a historical bias, and the bias has been to make the definition of tool use kind of as narrow as possible. So basically we wanted early researchers wanted tool behavior to be reserved for humans. So they went about kind of making the definition pretty restrictive, I think, so that we could feel special. The condensed rules of tool use are pretty straightforward, and I've listed them here. And you can see they are straightforward, except for maybe number 3. And you can see how number 3 might come into play in our discussion tonight. So, so take note of that. So as an example, when an Egyptian vulture picks up an ostrich egg, in order to crack that egg to eat it, if that vulture picks up the egg and throws it against the ground, as they're known to do, this does not qualify as tool use. If we go back to our rules, you can see that the third rule of tool use is that the object being used is not attached to the environment. So when the vulture is throwing the egg against the ground is in essence the environment. So, so this doesn't count as tool use. But if that same vulture fails to crack the egg by throwing it against the ground and picks up a stone and uses the stone to crack the ostrich egg, as they're known to do, this does qualify as tool use. We're not sure exactly how much discretion that vulture is using in choosing the stone, but clearly the stone is being manipulated as a tool to crack the ostrich egg. So in this way, Egyptian vultures are tool users. But you can see how the rules kind of change that perspective. So if we return to the beaver dam and lodge, this category of architecture is known as abode construction. And it's a unique form of architecture where animals are building habitations. So if our rules tell us that the beaver dam and lodge do not qualify as tools because they are fixed to the environment. So this entire hydroengineering project of constructing the dam and lodge under the strict definition does not qualify as tool use. Probably, but I will say that there are some populations of beavers, Northern Ontario in particular, that actually will chew stumps, and those stumps they use as stools, and they'll get up onto the stool in order to get better leverage to chew down a tree to make the dam. So, so when the beavers are using the stumps as stools, then they are in fact tool users. So you can see how the semantics are kind of driving the designation. So if we think of a swallow nest and how that fits in with our rules, the nest itself is very firmly attached to the cliff or the bridge. So a swallow nest would be disqualified as a tool. But I think you could make the argument that each mouthful of mud that the swallow is using to build this nest is almost like a little brick. And they're putting these small mouthfuls of mud or these small bricks together to build the nest. So in that sense, I think those individual bricks you could think of as tools, or at least proto-tools. So we do have at least one example of abode construction that does qualify as tool use. And the reason being is that this octopus gathers coconut shells and will carry those coconut shells around. And because the octopus carries the shells with them, this form of abode construction actually does qualify as tool use, which is pretty neat. And here's one that's using a coconut shell and a seashell as an abode. So this must be the fancy part of town right here where they're using shells. So to qualify as tool users, if we go back to the swallow example, our swallows would have to either carry their nests around with them, which is not very practical, or they'd have to likely use some kind of a vessel in order to mix up the mud to build their nests. Both of those things would qualify as tool use. But if you've ever watched swallows, they work very, very fast, and they don't really have time to use any kind of tool to mix the mud. Their bills work just fine for this. And if you think about how many trips, hundreds and hundreds of trips it takes to build a nest, you'll understand that for cliff swallows, the bill is the best tool for the job for mixing up our little mud bricks. So you can kind of get the idea here of the push-pull that's going on between, on one hand, tool use being difficult to evolve, requiring special cognition. And on the other hand, the fact that most animals just don't require tools. I think the parrot is a good example. A parrot that can do math at the 4th grade level, speak multiple languages and understand multiple languages. In the wild, at least, parrots are not known to use tools. And it's probably because the parrot bill is very versatile, and parrots likely just don't need to use tools. Most of us have heard of the New Caledonian Crow, and the reason we've heard of it is because these crows do have a tool culture. They fashion these little stick probes by breaking off twigs, and they fish out insect larvae, which is their main form of prey. Now, one thing you should know is the crows, they don't just pick up the nearest twig, like you might think. They're breaking off these twigs in a particular fashion in order to make a tiny little hook at the base. And these hooks can be kind of right curving or left curving, depending on what they need. But they are, in this process, making a specific type of tool, a probing tool. Now, this differs from a chimpanzee in true primate fashion. A chimpanzee will just pick up the nearest stick, gnaw on the end, and to make a spear. So it's a little bit more rudimentary. And as far as chimpanzees and their termite foraging, it kind of seems like they do just pick up the nearest stick in order to forage for those termites. So as awesome as chimps are, I think the crows might have the chimp's beat when it comes to stick tools. Now, the crows have likely been using these tools for a long, long time. And the reason we know that is they've got adaptations that are really specific to tool foraging. These particular crows have very straight bills that are perfect for grasping these twigs, and their eyes are more forward facing. So this kind of improves their depth perception, so they're able to fish out the insect larvae. So they are pretty amazing. as far as nests go, I think the chimps might have the crows beat. Chimps build very sturdy nests. They have to withstand wind, jumping, whatever horseplay is going on up there in the nest. So these are very sturdy structures. So I would say that for chimps, in my mind, their nests are much more impressive than their spears. So we know that birds have more at stake from a single nest than chimps. So, you know, a lot is going into nest searching, searching for the right site for a nest, and gathering the right materials. So nests serve these three primary functions: camouflage, structural integrity, and insulation. And birds do use the tools that are available, the materials that are available to make their nests. But oftentimes there's very specific components, especially for binding the nest together and for insulating the nest. And these materials can be much harder to find. Here's a picture of a broad-tailed hummingbird that has some milkweed that's gonna put that in the nest for insulating purposes. And so this hummingbird ended up with a perfectly camouflaged nest, I think, in a ponderosa pine branch. And so think about this nest and how many hundreds and hundreds of individual trips that it took to construct and to camouflage this nest. And the way I think of this type of bird nest is more essentially a camouflaged incubator machine rather than a true abode, since the primary function of this nest is going to be to incubate those eggs and nestlings. But we don't have a lot of research right now linking nests to actual tool use. But there has been a little bit of research in this topic. So we know that nests are fixed, and so probably not going to qualify as tools under the strict definition. But in some cases, nest components can qualify as tools. So burrowing owls will add mammal dung to their nests. And this is considered a form of at least proto-tool use. And the owls add the mammal dung apparently in order to attract invertebrate prey to feed to their nestlings. So again, this is considered a form of proto-tool use. These are horned coots from Bolivia. At first glance, this kind of looks like just your typical island nest that this pair is building. But if we look beneath the surface, this entire nest island that the birds are building the nest on is made from stones. And these are stones that the birds are diving for and actually creating the island. So this is kind of an amazing system right here. There's other birds that also use stones to stay dry, specifically chinstrap penguins. These penguins rely on stones extensively to keep their nests dry, especially more recently where increased meltwater is flooding their breeding grounds. They're having to use more and more stones. And so with these chinstrap penguins, stone delivery is part of the courtship ritual, and stealing stones from each other's nests is pretty common. So there's a lot of research on these guys. So what about songbirds? We do have a very small percentage of songbirds that are using stones in their nests. Pictured here is a desert lark, and the structure that you're seeing in front of this nest is referred to as a rampart. The black wheat ear is a very conspicuous stone user. These birds have been studied extensively in Spain. And in this species, the stones are used to anchor nests, but it's also developed into a male display. So it's a breeding display to see how many stones a male can bring to a nest site. So this is an impressive species. I will note that there's probably a lot of other wheat ears that are use stones in their nests that have not been studied, including the Arabian wheat ear, the Somalian wheat ear. These species just have not been studied, at least not any published studies. So here I've got a picture of two nests. These nests are from similar habitats. They appear like they could have been built by a bird of the same species, or perhaps even the same individual bird. But in fact, these two nests are thousands of kilometers apart. On the left is a nest from Lake Scott State Park, Lake Scott, one of those, State Park in Kansas. And on the right is a nest from Ein Gedi, I think, National Park in Israel. So very similar. And as you may have guessed, these nests were in fact built by different species. On the left, we've got a rock wren nest, and on the right, we have a black start nest. And I think it is remarkable that these two species, are very similar in size. They live in similar environments, and they build nearly identical nest structures, but they're not closely related birds at all, except for the fact that they're both songbirds, but they're not related. So definitely an example of convergent evolution here, as far as nest building goes. And their nests are so similar, we can get away with just a single diagram. It's a little bit blurry, but this just kind of shows you, this is a diagram of a black start nest, but it shows you kind of what's going on. Importantly, we've got a foundation of stones inside the nest cavity that usually extends outside. And then we have a cup nest that's built on top of that foundation of stones. And then usually we have even more stones that are incorporated into the next nest structure at the end. And that's kind of a cross section of the pictures that you're seeing. Here I've got just some examples of rock wren nests, local rock wren nests from Larimer County, so you can get an idea of what these structures look like. I would categorize the top two nests as ground nests and the bottom two nests as cliff nests, just because of where they're situated. But it's not always real clear cut what's on the ground and what's in a cliff. Sometimes we have nests that are kind of in between. So the rock wren is found in rock-strewn areas in the west, generally west of the Missouri River. And it is our only North American species that's known to use stones extensively in their nests. To really get good descriptions of rock wren nests, you have to go pretty far back. 2004 was a big year for rock wren natural history, 1904. And these efforts were pioneered by Florence Bailey. If you don't know who Florence Bailey is, she was pretty amazing, a pioneering naturalist. She documented the natural history of lots of different bird species. She traveled by bronco, And she spearheaded the movement to protect plume birds that were being hunted for the women's hat industry of the day. She thought that these hats were ridiculous, and she wasn't afraid to say so. And she was pretty successful in tamping down this industry for these plume hats. She also took what's probably the first known picture of a rock wren nest right here. And she actually collected this nest, and she took it back with her to the east and donated it to the Smithsonian. And it does exist in the Smithsonian in DC in a warehouse. I contacted the folks there to see if they could find it. And they were able to locate this nest and measure a sample of the stones. So they were very helpful in that regard. So the nest in the picture does still exist. It's not on display or anything like that. And so those stones that they measured for me, I included as part of my data. So I've measured a lot of these stones from nests. And so I'll just show you this one graph. Basically, this graph is the weight of individual stones plotted against their length, their width, and their thickness. So top line is length, middle line is width, bottom line is thickness. So the takeaway from this graph is that the wrens are using very flat stones. Now, if you look at some descriptions of rock wren nests, some of them mention rock wrens using pebbles. I think there might be some incidental pebbles in the nests that I've seen, but in my mind, these are not pebbles. Pebbles would be, we'd see these lines converge if they were pebbles. They'd be as wide as they were long, as they were thick. These are stones, and they're flat stones. So it does seem that rock wrens are preferentially choosing these flat stones. And I think there's good reasons for that. First of all, the stones have to be carried in the bill. So as you can see, the wrens don't have really large bills, so they need flat stones that they're able to carry. And secondly, I think the flat stones stack much better. It's the same principle that we would use when building, a patio or a rock wall. These are flat stones. They stack together to form stable structures. And so I think that's another reason that the wrens are preferentially choosing these stones. And here I think is where things get pretty interesting. As part of my work that I did, I measured nest cavities with and without the stones in place. So obviously these were inactive nests that I was measuring, and I will note that I returned the stones as best I could after I did this work. But you can see the difference between the top and bottom pictures. The stones do make a big difference in the function of these cavities that the wrens are choosing. So here's kind of a summary of what we found. The larger the original nest cavity opening size, which you're seeing on the x-axis, the more stones were present in the nest cavity, which you're seeing on the y-axis. And you can see it's not perfect, but we've got a pretty tight relationship here between the original cavity that the birds are choosing and the amount of stones that they add. And so we then realized that if we plotted that same x-axis, the nest cavity opening size without stones, against just the area occluded by stones, so kind of the percent occlusion, you can think about that. When we do that, we eliminate some of the variability that's natural with all these different size cavities, because we're just looking at the occlusion rate here. And when we do that, we see a really tight relationship, which we weren't looking for and didn't necessarily expect, but it did show up, and it's pretty striking. So it appears, from these measurements at least, that rock wrens may be using the stones to achieve, or at least to aim for, an optimal cavity entrance size. So that's kind of the thing, this entrance size for the cavity is the thing that we think is driving the stone use. And this makes sense. We know from research on other wrens, especially other cavity nesting wrens, that they exhibit the same pattern of occluding the cavities to restrict entrance to the nest. So in my view, the wren's use of stones can be thought of as an analog to tool use. The stones are manipulated to produce a beneficial outcome. The stones are fixed to the environment, but I think the stones are fixed to the environment because the cavity is fixed to the environment, and the wrens put them there so that they're fixed to the environment. So in my mind, just because they're fixed to the environment, they're still facultatively adjusting the amount of stones that they use. And I think we can think of this as at least a tool use analog. And I think this really gives wrens a lot of flexibility in terms of the nest sites that they choose. Anything from a small depression in a little cut bank, almost the size of a bank swallow excavation, to medium-sized nests here, spaces between boulders that offer good protection, all the way up to these rock shelves that require a very large number of stones to get the right size opening, or at least to aim for the right size opening. So you can see from these pictures that the rock wrens do have a lot of flexibility in the nest sites that they have access to. And I do have one final thought about nests as tools. And it'll kind of just give you a little insight of how I think of this. If I were to weave a basket, it wouldn't be nearly as nice as a weaver basket here. But if I did weave a basket and went down to the store and bought some eggs and brought the eggs home in my basket, the basket would certainly be considered a tool, and I would be pretty impressed with myself. So in the same way, I think we can kind of think of bird nests as egg carrying baskets that just happen to be fixed to the environment because that's the best place for them to be camouflaged and highly functional. So I do want to thank all the groups that helped to fund my research, including Colorado Mountain Club, Larimer County, City of Fort Collins, and Colorado Field Ornithologists, also UNC. And I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Excellent. Well, Nat, thank you very much for that presentation. It was fascinating. I really enjoyed nests in the context of tool use before, and so that was great. So yes, everyone, I encourage you to write your questions in, and while we're waiting for those questions, I had one for you, Nat. So thinking about the stones and thinking about the stones, potentially as kind of a tool, I was wondering if you've done any work to see if they're modifying kind of the microclimate within the nest as well. A lot of those pictures, it looked like potentially that rampart of stones potentially was in the sunshine, and if it was warming the microclimate or something else in that regard.
Yeah, that's a great question. I did look at that, and a lot of work has been done in Israel on some of those desert birds, the desert lark and the black start, to look at that where, where climate is more of an issue. But obviously with rock wrens, if they're nesting in the Superstition Mountains in Arizona, for example, it's hot. And the stones you could think of, they could ameliorate the temperature within the nest cavity, or they could act as like a little solar collector. So one thing I did is I got these little temperature buttons that record temperature every minute, and I placed those within some nests, and then I had control buttons outside the nest. And here in northern Colorado, I did not find any significant differences as far as temperature goes. And those recorded temperature and humidity. So yeah, there was not significant differences here, but I could see it being more of a factor in warmer climates.
Excellent. We have another question from email coming in saying, so the rock wren patios, they don't seem to have a primary function as far as like a sexual selection display or any sort of display for females. Asking that, not stating that.
Right. No, great question. It does not seem like it. One interesting thing is that the wren pairs are building these nests after they're already paired. So in that sense, the males aren't really putting on a display. And from everything I can tell, we didn't have too many banded pairs, but from the banded pairs we did have, it seems like the females are the main nest builders here. So they're doing the brunt of the stone carrying and the nest building.
Yeah. Another question from Carol McCaslin. Do you have any idea of how the stones prevent predation?
Yeah, another great question. This is something I'm really interested in. There's this idea that the stones act as an alarm system. So you can kind of imagine how this would work. Stones, they do make noise. So females are the sole incubators in rock wrens. So if a female is deep inside that cavity incubating, the nest could signal a predator approaching, either a snake or a mammal. It seems like rats are key predators for rock wrens. So you might not be able to save the eggs from a predator, but at least the female would be able to flush and they could, make another nesting attempt. So this alarm system is something I'm really interested in. I did do some testing using a rubber snake and a microphone inside the nest. And so I did find some differences there, but that's something I still want to look at.
Excellent. Another question came in from Ellen Orleans. If a bird deliberately drops an egg to eat on a stone instead of just the dirt ground, is the stone considered a tool?
I would say, if you talk to the tool use researcher community, I think they would say that was a borderline case. And I would say if the vulture meant to throw the egg on the rock, then that you could think of that as tool use, but probably not, because that rock is fixed. It's attached to the environment. So probably not.
Yep. And a few of the previous answers will have touched on aspects of this question, but if there's anything else you'd like to add to it, a question coming in from Sandra Larson. What makes it adaptive for a wren to haul 200 times its own weight in rocks to make a nest? Your example of the nest with 2,800 grams of rocks.
Yeah, that's the $1,000 question. I think the stones are multifunctional. So there has to be a reason that they're putting all this work in. The other thing is that I didn't mention is there's not a lot of evidence that they're reusing the nests even. So some of these are one-time use. So I think it has to be predator avoidance and cavity occlusion. And whatever else is driving the stone use, that has to be enough of an impetus to put in the work. And you know, in these environments, stones are what's available. So there's no shortage of the stones.
Wasn't there significant moisture wicking?
Yeah. Lacey makes a good point. I do think, you know, I did mention the penguins. I think the stones are also facilitating drainage. So they're helping to keep the nest dry. So that's another thing that could be driving the system.
Excellent. And in that answer, you also addressed the other question that came up about how often the rock wrens are reusing these nests, or if they're kind of refurbished year after year. But it sounds like they're primarily one-off uses.
Yeah, it seems like it. Although that's just in my little study system here in Larimer County. For the 3 years I was monitoring nests from year to year. I only saw a nest reused once or twice out of, almost 70 nests. So at least in that 3-year period, we weren't seeing a lot of nest reuse. Now, if you looked at a longer cycle, maybe they do get reused, but it also, they actually degrade pretty quickly, surprisingly, just from snow and ice and weather.
Yep. Excellent. Well, that is all the questions that have popped up so far in the chat window. There are a lot of people thanking you and mentioning how great the presentation was and how fascinating it was. So you can go ahead and check out those chat features thanking you as well. But I wanted to thank you on behalf of Boulder County Audubon Society and all of our members and everyone who's participated. It was a great presentation, and I learned a lot, and I think others in the meeting did as well. So thank you very much. Best of luck with your continued research and getting this out and published if parts of it aren't published yet, which I personally know is a challenge and can be a long process. So good luck with that.
Thanks,
and I don't see any other. Someone asked if you would like to share your best rock wren song impression.
Oh, I'm not a good rock wren song expert.
We will not force you to do that.
I have recorded them a lot, and they are fun to listen to. So yeah, if you get a chance, listen to them for a while. Yeah, they're interesting songsters, and they have some sounds that don't even sound like a bird. So.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you very much. For everyone else who's in the meeting, thank you for joining us again this evening. Next month in October, we have a meeting on webs and arachnids. So it will fit with a autumnal theme and Halloween as well. But I'm very excited to hear from Dave Leatherman about arachnids in that meeting as well. And I hope you can join us for that meeting. Again, thank you for the fascinating presentation. And that is the end of tonight's meeting.
Thank you.